Hello everybody, welcome back to another video to the Dungeoneer's Tavern, except we're recording in the studio VC because it plans. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about creating your own homebrew world and stuff to just make it interesting. You know, all the fun and good stuff. Today with me we got Martin, as always, and Eldritch Defender. Who
Life
would like to
Crazy
start off?
Soldier of Zariel is my new name.
Yes,
Don't ask why. Maybe
of
it's because
course.
someone else here is the Sage of Orcus, so I'm the Soldier of Zariel now.
Yes, of course. How could we have been so blind? Anyway, so who would like to start us off in world building?
Eldritch, do you know much about world building?
I know a bit.
I mean,
Okay,
I have been making my own world.
here is what I have learned about world building throughout my many seconds of experience. To start a campaign world, you can think of your campaign world like a bit of an odd analogy here, but like Legos. And another thing that I want to say about campaign worlds is that the pre-made settings like Forgotten Realms and shit, those are sets that come with instructions. And to be honest, there's nothing wrong with following those. Those are settings that people have been working on for fucking years. They got good stuff, man. They're really well thought out. And so maybe instead of going through all the trouble of what we're going to describe, you can just purchase a set with instructions and make that. That's just how I want to start this off, to be honest. And second of all, what I want to say is that when you're building with Legos, if you're feeling uninspired, where you want to start is maybe you can just find one really cool Lego piece that you want. And then you think, how do I build off this piece? And this is like, you find any part of your campaign world, any event, anything cool in it, and you can build off that to make something really, really cool from it. Like maybe you have a city in your campaign world, just this really well thought out city. Maybe you have just the idea for the campaign. Maybe you want to run a campaign where you're facing off against a lich. A lich named Jeff Bezos who feeds the souls of his workers to his phylactery. Or something like that. And maybe you think, how can I put Jeff Bezos into my world? Where did he get his workers from? Where do I put Amazon in? Where did Jeff come from? Why is he so evil? And then from there, you could go into Jeff's backstory, like what village did he come from? How did he come to want the souls of his workers? What wizard school did he train at? What guilds was he a part of? And just like that, your campaign world is beginning to come together. Does anyone else want to say anything, or am I just
One
going on?
another way that I find it is that I imagine the world first as a story. It's more helpful if you have a campaign, at least in my mind. You have a campaign in mind, and then so that you can have set locations that you can build, and then you can branch off from there like a tree.
Yeah, Eldritch raises a good point. The first word in campaign setting is campaign, after all.
Very true.
So I always build a campaign with the world that I'm building. If I do decide to play in it, I have areas that I know will need expansion, and I have a basis to expand them on.
Yeah, now these are all good ways to get started, but I'd also like to bring up that we're not just talking about how to make a world, because
Mhm.
anyone can think up a world and say, oh look, here's a town here, here's a village here, here's a
Mhm.
god, his name is Jeff Bezos, and he feeds the souls of his workers, but how do you get your players to love your world? To feel immersed in it? And to be honest, the first thing that I want to say about that is you gotta find some way to set it apart very, very clearly from
Mm-hmm.
other campaign worlds. Like if your players are like, oh wow, we go to the town, we buy from the merchant, but how is this town different from any other town that you might find in the world of other campaign worlds? Like, think about it. When you're making your town, how do you describe it? Like, oh, you walk through the streets of the town and it's a town. But maybe you could like have the town with some sort of celebrating some unique holiday in your world to set it
Mm-hmm.
apart. Like maybe when your players are walking through the town, they'll notice unique decorations. Maybe they'll notice a bunch of people are cowering inside because of a bad thing that's gonna happen. And an interesting idea I had earlier that I stole from someone else is that celestial objects can be a fun way to set your
Mm-hmm.
campaign apart. Like elder evils. Atropus is one of them. He's pretty cool. He's not a really thing. He's just a planet. But if you like have something like that in the sky and your players are like at night, they look up at it and you can describe to it what they looks. That immediately sets your world apart from all the campaign worlds that are just like, oh, there's stars in the sky and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because it really sets it apart, makes it look like a cool fantasy campaign world sky instead of just what you might see looking up in ours. Like Crin's Three Moons.
Yeah. Many planets have different amounts of moons and different kinds of moons or stars than ours. You could have a difference in moons or a difference in visible planets as well,
Yeah,
as well
exactly.
as set constellations and what the people in the world they think the constellations mean, even if they aren't true.
Yeah, exactly. And another way that you could think of with these is if you are having trouble setting up organizations in your world, you could think of like what what people think of these celestial objects.
Mm-hmm.
A group of wizards who are astronomers and like, oh, we have named all these moons, or maybe a bunch of guys who want to sacrifice people to the moon god, or the moon devil, or whatever. And then you've got the basis for the faction. Factions can also are a really good way to get your players immersed in your world, in my opinion. Like, if your players are just
Yeah.
wandering around, doing absolutely nothing, walking around, beating people up, they're like, oh yeah, they're making gold, they're having a good time. But if you want to get them immersed in the world to make them love it,
Mm-hmm.
if they join the moon wizards who like to look at the moon to catalog it, they'll they they'll get to know your world better. They might get to like being in that organization, getting to
Mm-hmm.
know NPCs, if you know what I mean.
Factions are also very helpful for a story that you have in mind.
Exactly.
So,
Factions are just generally a great thing to add to your campaign world.
mhm. The basic factions you should always have are trading factions, religious factions, and
Thieves Guild, the Thieves Guild. You totally
thieves
want a
guild.
Thieves Guild.
If thieves guild, if you want the organized crime, and then for the magic casters, arcane school faction.
Yeah, but also Thieves Guilds can be are one of the best ways to set up an adventure in your
Mm-hmm.
campaign world, because a Thieves Guild can sometimes lead you to other organizations like a cult. Like if you want your BBEG to be the Demogorgon, then maybe the Thieves Guild is acting up lately, and the party's got to go investigate, and eventually it leads them to its cult, and by then they're leveled up a bit, and then they
Mm-hmm.
track down the cult to one of their generals or whatever, leveling up even more, and then eventually you know, you can kind of lead them to level 20 and they can face off against him and probably steamroll him.
Mm-hmm.
But also, that's another thing I want to bring up about world building. There are a lot of players out there, such as myself, that absolutely love the Forgotten Realms lore and stuff, and Outer Planes and deities like that. So, I just want to say, do not overthink the Outer Planes. Like, the Material Plane
Mm-hmm.
should be unique, should be cool, but unless your campaign is, like, going to the Outer Planes a lot, even if it is going to the Outer
Yeah.
Planes a lot, you should not overthink that. If you want a pantheon for your world, you can look in the back of the PHB and have a pantheon
Mm-hmm.
and just be like, oh, these are gods, and if my players want cleric powers, they can just use these,
The outer
and they'll
planes
have fun.
should be the material plane, but the and then you modify the material plane as needed.
Yeah, the material plane is something that you really want to make unique,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're using Forgotten Realms, because that's the place where humans like your players are. That is
Yeah.
where they spend most of their time. That's where they have fun. But sometimes your players will want to visit the Abyss, and if you tell them, oh, the Abyss doesn't exist, sorry, they'll be disappointed. Because they wanted to visit the Abyss. And then they'll be like, oh man, your material plane was so cool, but this kind of ruins the game. Nah, your players will have much more fun if they're familiar, fun, Limbo,
Mm-hmm.
Astral Plane, Ethereal Plane, Abyss, Nine Hells, Asmodeus, Demogorgon, Orcus, Grazit are all waiting for them out there. You know what I
Yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
mean?
we can do well without Orcus.
True. Totally true. In my campaign world, Orcus grew so obese that his speed is now 0, and he has to ride a Draculich everywhere whose speed is halved because of how heavy he is.
Yeah, there's just a thing about Orcus, right? Where we just use him for laughs, especially against Dark Crazy, because
Yeah,
he just loves Orcus halfway to death. So we're
Mm-hmm.
just like, yeah, Orcus is lame and stupid, and yeah, and he
that's why
gets
I
so
made
mad.
my name Soldier of Zariel. Yeah, but for the most part, the role that the gods serve in your campaign world, they are the people who give the clerics and paladins their power. They don't need to be anything more.
If you want the gods, the baseline assumption for gods is that they exist and they give insight through prophecies and visions. If they do any more, that's just extra.
Yeah, it kind of is. But also it can be fun for a world where gods are just gone. Like they once were there,
Yeah,
but now they're not. Like the Cataclysm in Kryn. That's kind of an interesting event. How like
I once
people.
played a campaign recently where the gods disappeared in an event called the Age of Silence, where clerics lost their ability to cast, and the gods just would not talk to mortals.
Yeah, that's fun. But also, if you are running a campaign like that, in my opinion, it's still more fun for your players if you don't lock them out of the paladin or cleric classes. Because
Hmm.
I personally love paladins and I love clerics. And if I like had a really cool paladin concept and like, oh, can I join your game? I want to play a paladin, and my team was like, nah, sorry, that don't exist in my world. I'm gonna be disappointed and I'm not gonna have as
Yeah,
much fun of a time. Like if there's a
clerics and
musically,
hmm,
yeah,
clerics and paladins don't always have to have divine power. One
exactly,
example of mine is a doctor who drew his power from life itself
yeah,
instead of the god of life.
yeah. That's a fun way to put things, you know, like
Yeah,
ideologies and stuff.
Hmm.
The Kuatora are funny. That's one of the things I like is that they worship gods so much that they can make new gods.
Yeah.
And maybe
yeah,
maybe if you're really interested in that, you could have a player whose cleric is so devout and goes around spreading the word of their god. And if a new god gets created, from that cleric's efforts, that cleric is gonna be like, wow, that was cool.
Yep.
Also, if you're building a whole world, like, let's say you're starting a campaign and you're building a world for the players in there, something that you can do is make, like, your start off point, just base it on the players a little bit. Like, if it's a new world set for this campaign specifically, that gives you a lot of room to work with to please and satisfy the players. Such as, let's say, typical edgy rogue stuff. You know, family killed in a village fire and orphaned. You know, typical edgy stuff. You can make the person that killed his family somehow like a major threat that's been happening throughout all of the continent. You know, and for whatever reason, they have a personal vendetta towards the rogue. Now, why do you have so much room to work with? Because you just have the room. Because this world ain't fully thought out. But that makes the rogue almost feel special. And we all know edgy rogue boys needs to feel special.
Yeah. Much like building a campaign, you could always build your world around the players and not the other way around.
Yeah, usually when I make a campaign role, I make up one little detail, one back to the Lego analogy. I place down one Lego piece, and then I tell all my players, alright, put down the rest of them. And then we make something beautiful. But I'd also like to say something about a campaign that I once played in a viewer's, Nico. Something that I think you did well, that I had fun with, was, in the, Black Blade thing, we got to keep hearing about what the older mortal heroes did, like that barbarian who killed the Tarrasque, and then the wizard resurrected him, and then we got to kill the Tarrasque just like that barbarian did. That was fun. You know, the older heroes setting standards, being like, oh, we've done cool shit in the past. You know, kind of just motivated our characters to do better, to kill things, to be cool, because other
Yeah,
people have been cool.
the reason I love adding a history and a story to the worlds I make is so that so it feels more real when the players play. You know, they can almost feel like, wow, this is a world instead of just a thought. Which, like the example with, I think is no, Eldritch, don't laugh, but his name was Crone the Barbarian.
Ah.
Yeah, first name I used for Crone. New World reference. Anyway, yeah, because that barbarian was, you know, the people could look at him. Sure, he died in whatever way. I think, yeah, the way he quote unquote died a couple thousand years ago was he sailed off into the seas and was never seen again. And I add a history and a story so that it can feel more real. And that way, if the players do equally great feats, they have like that reassurance that their names will also be told in the same bright light as people they are hearing about.
Yeah, when we played that second campaign in that world, and my character just became the queen of the entire kingdom or whatever, we totally destroyed that kingdom later. But for a little bit, I got to hear about how my character was once the queen of the kingdom that I then burnt down.
Yeah.
Past character, couple thousand years past, new character destroyed the entire kingdom.
Yeah.
Having having stories and the tales of past deeds is always helpful as it does not only motivate the players but also be able to make reference to what happened in the past campaigns. And depending on what happened, It could be that it could inspire new actions from the players as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing about the Sunday game I'm running with Eldritch and a few others, though it is not exactly touched on a lot, the players are getting very well known all across the land that they are playing.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of shown whenever people are like, hey, you guys are blank, right? And they go, yeah. Just to show, like, yeah, these players are getting recognized for their actions. Granted, in the Sunday game, their actions are more or less secret, but people know that they're doing it for good.
Yeah. Make cool magic items to add to your world, because those are both fun for your players to pick up. And then when they're using the battle axe of Bob the Barbarian who beat Baphomet, yeah, that's the best magic item to add to your game. When they're using that, they both get a cool magic item, and then they're also like, wow, this is something that happened. And it's also a good way to trick like your players who don't like learning about your world into learning about your world, because then they're like, I want to use the battle axe of Bob the Barbarian who beat Baphomet, and then they realize they know that Bob the Barbarian once beat Baphomet, and I mean, if your players don't want to learn about the world, though, you probably shouldn't try and force them to learn. The
Yeah.
+3 battle axe would also do for players like that. But sometimes players will want items that like have a special story significance instead of just generic magic items, because that's a way to
Yeah.
kind of make your items stand out.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I am thinking of and probably will get to working on is, like, what did we call them, Eldritch? Them staffs that can let you cast 10th level spells, but they're like extremely rare and nobody knows how to make them.
Saves of epic magic.
Yeah, staffs of, or rods of epic magic.
Wads of epic magic.
Yeah, these staffs, in my world, are staffs that were made during the Arcane era, which is when magic was hitting its peak. And these rods were made for high mages, like mages of supreme political power, so that they can cast much better, cooler spells. And whenever the Arcane era ended and the Empire in which they were made fell, the way to